everyone, today I have a different tutorial for you. This tutorial is to show you how I thread this machine using a twin needle so that I can top stitch my garments. I have had this request to show how to thread a machine when using a twin needle so that you can top stitch garments. This is handy if you don't have a cover stitch machine and you only have a serger, or if you don't have a serger and you're using a zigzag stitch for the garments to construct them, but then you want to do some top stitching. So this will show you how to thread a machine when you're using a twin needle. Now, your machine may look a little bit different, but this is the machine I'm going to be showing you on. It is my brother machine, and I'm sorry, I'm filming this on my own on my phone so that I can get some different angles. So if the camera is moving a lot, I apologize. That's just so I can get the different angles. So this is the machine I'm using here. This is a Brother SQ9130. This is just a machine my husband had purchased me previously from Walmart. It's a really basic machine, not super fancy. It is computerized, but this is the machine I use when I'm making garments. And this is the machine I had used before I had my serger. And here's my serger here. You can see it's all set up. I am sewing right now. So I thought, well, I'm doing this before I do that top stitching on that garment, I could show you how I thread this machine because I need to thread it in order to be able to top stitch the garment I'm working on. So your machine may look a little bit different than mine, and that's okay, but generally the threading is going to be a little bit of the same. There may be some different paths your machine may take, but it'll have the same method, I guess, so to speak, for what you're going to do. So first thing you need to do is make sure you have a machine that you're using that does have a zigzag stitch option, because you need to be able to have that wide enough needle hole down here to be able to accommodate the double needle. And you can see here I have a twin needle in my machine here. So this is a twin needle. I'm just going to focus. So it's a twin needle. So it's two needles on one bar and they're in there. And that's why I'm saying here you can see this needle hole here. I'm going to grab some tweezers so I can point better. Oops, sorry about that. This needle hole here is wide enough for the twin needle to be able to fit through. So the machine like my Juki that I generally sew my bags on, I can't use a twin needle because this needle hole down here on the plate is not big enough. So you need to use a machine that has different stitch options, such as a zigzag stitch, and then you know that your needle will be able to fit in that hole down here. So the first thing you'll want to do is install your twin needle as per the instructions of installing needles on your machine. And then the next thing you're going to do is get your two spools of thread. You need two spools of thread for this. So for this one, I'm using black. So I'm just going to go ahead and start with the black. The first one I always start with is the machine. So I always start with the thread on the machine. So put your thread on your thread spool. And I use this cap because my thread comes here. Your thread may come off the top. It just depends on your machine, or it may have a spool behind, a spool pin to put it behind. Grab some thread off and then start threading your machine as you normally would. So you'll thread it all the way down. I'm just going to turn my machine so you can see what I'm doing, and also turn my camera. So thread it the way you normally would all the way through your entire machine. So just as you normally would. And normally I wouldn't do this with the light on, but I do need some light so you can see what I'm doing. So I am just threading it through all the thread guides and then through this needle. And I'll make sure this isn't shredding at all. So I'll cut it fresh. And then we will thread the eye of the needle. Now, if you have an automatic threader, you will not be able to use it at this point because this can't go down and turn into where that needle is. And this is hard to do with the camera in the way, so I'm just sort of moving my machine. So then you thread the needle, and the needle I threaded first, just going to make this refocus, is the first needle here. So there's the two needles, so here's the first needle and the second needle. So the needle I threaded first was this first needle. And this is just what I do. You could thread the second one first, but I always thread the first one because it lets me know that was the first spool I started with, so I'll thread the first needle. So the second needle has nothing on through it right now. So I went through the thread guides and I went all the way through all the channels that I need to. So it came off my spool, I went through the thread guides, came down around the front, back up, whoops, right through there and back down and through the thread guide there. So I've done all the threading that you would normally do for your one thread that you would use. But now we're using 2 threads. So we need to grab our thread spool. So this here is what I use, a thread stand. If you don't have a thread stand, you can always put your extra spool of thread in a cup or something, but I use a thread stand. And this thread stand you can get from any store. You can get it online, Amazon, anything you want. I believe this was purchased from Amazon. So I thread it through just like that. Now you're going to go through all the same thread guides all the way. So starting at this first one here, thread it through, and then you're going to go down the front and you just follow your threading that your machine has all the way through. And I like to hold the thread at the back too, so that it doesn't pull too much and then I can have some tightness here. Now, when I get to here, I don't thread it back through this thread guide here. I'm just trying to fix my camera. I don't thread through this thread guide here where my first thread went through. This thread guide here at the bottom before the needle, I don't thread it through there. You don't thread through that thread guide. You skip that one altogether. You just thread it right through the eye of the needle. Leave that last guide alone. I hope that makes sense. I'm going to drop this down. So I've threaded it through the needle. So now they're both threaded through my needle, and the second thread here didn't go through this thread guide down here before the needle. I left it not through there. I just went right through the needle. So I followed all the path for the threading. So from this one over to here, down through the front. Sorry, I know it's a bit shaky. Up, back through that loop and back down, and then I didn't thread it through this last thread guide, but all the other thread guides I followed. I didn't go through the last thread guide. That's it. Thread it through the eye of the needle, and then you're ready to go. And to make the bobbin thread come up, it's the same thing as you would normally do. So I'm just going to down and up, and then you'll see it pulled my bobbin thread up. And if I can just grab it here. It's hard to see. Can't get it. There we go. So there's my bobbin thread. So same thing as what you would normally do. You press your button down or you turn your hand wheel to make the needles go down, and that'll still grab your bobbin thread. And you'll see I have 3 threads here. Bobbin, second needle, and first needle. And they're all here, all 3 threads. And then you just select your thread length, what stitch you want to use, however it's chosen on your machine, you would choose those. So when I'm stitching for a garment, I use the different lengths. So it just depends on the garment I'm using, but I use different lengths, and it is a straight stitch that I'm going to use. I don't use a zigzag stitch here. It's just a straight stitch. And on the back of your garment, you'll notice it'll have a zigzag stitch because you have the twin needles. So the top will have the two stitches going up, and then the bottom will have a zigzag stitch. And that's what this twin needle does. It gives it a zigzag stitch, which will help your garment stretch when you're wearing it. So where there is, say for here, I've attached some binding here for where the neck is. Now I'm going to top stitch along there, and I do want this to stretch. So I can't use a regular straight stitch. I want to use this stitch with the twin needle. So I'll have 2 stitches going along, and underneath there'll be a zigzag stitch, and that'll help it stretch nicely. And that's how you thread a machine when you're using a twin needle and you want to use the twin needle with some garments to be able to top stitch. And you can even do this kind of top stitching if you want on a bag or anything if you really wanted to. It's really your choice. But again, you do need to use a machine that has the options for a zigzag stitch or different stitches so that you have that wide enough needle hole down here to be able to accommodate the size of the twin needle. And the other thing to note is twin needles do come in different sizes, just like your regular needles, but they also come in different sizes here where the spacing is here between the needle. They also come in different sizes there. So you'll want to find a needle that you like and the width that you like so that you have the width of spacing between the two stitching on the top here. So say these are your stitches here. You want to have the spacing you like between the stitches. So I just went with this one. I ordered a bunch of different needles. I believe I ordered these from Sewing Parts Online, or it may have been Wawak. I don't remember where I got it from, but I just went and ordered a bunch of different needles and I just sort of found the one that I liked the spacing on, and that's what I went with. I guess there was really no rhyme or reason. It was just a personal preference, so it could be the same for you. I'm no expert in this. I, don't say I'm an expert in, sewing garments or anything like that. This is just what I do. These are just my extra little tips and tricks that I thought I'd share with you, because you don't need to have a serger. You don't need to have a cover stitch machine in order to make beautiful garments. Before I had my serger, I used the zigzag stitch on this machine here. I used the zigzag stitch and I made all my garments and I sewed them all together with a zigzag stitch. And then I would even top stitch them with a zigzag stitch as well, or a stretch stitch, whatever stitch you want to use. But then I found out about using a twin needle, and I started using a twin needle to do all my top stitching, and it just makes all the difference, and it looks really beautiful, and you have this really beautiful, nicely polished finish garment when you're done. So that is how you thread a machine for a twin needle, so that you can use a twin needle for top stitching if you're doing top stitching on a garment and you don't want to use your zigzag stitch. Really easy peasy lemon squeezy. I really enjoy it, and I find top stitching with this is really easy and really fast, and I really like it. Again, make sure you're using the machine that has this wide needle hole and the proper foot too. You need that space in your foot as well. I just keep this foot on because this is the foot that has that wide hole, and I believe this is the foot I also use if I'm doing a zigzag stitch as well. So I hope you enjoyed this little tutorial. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. Maybe I will show you. Actually, I will show you how I stitch with this foot. So you'll notice I moved my foot over. So my machine here, I can move, so if you watch my needle, see how it's moving? I can move that over, and that helps me with seam allowance. So where my needles are going to go for my seam allowance for my garments, so how far from the seam I want my seam allowance to be. And I just choose one that I think I like the look of. So what I'll do is lay my garment on. And I know, again, I'm trying to do this on my own, so it's a little bit hard. So I lay my garment on, and I use on my foot here where this clear plastic stops and the metal starts. I use that as my guide for lining up with the seam here that I'm stitching on. And I use that as my guide, and that's sort of where my seam allowance is. And then my stitch length. So right now I have my stitch length. I usually like it at about a 4.5. And my stitch, so where my needle position is at a 4. So that's where it is. Now this may be different on your machine, so use what your machine, your machine you're the best, use what you're comfortable with your machine using, or what you're used to using on your machine. Whatever works for your machine. Everybody's machine is different. So I'm just going to show you how it stitches, and this may feel a bit awkward for me because I have to sort of be angled funny. But I'll show you how it looks. So I've already got it all serged. I've serged the binding on. Hopefully I can do this. So I'm lining up again. Remember, I'm lining up where that clear plastic ends and that metal starts. I'm lining my foot up with that seam, where that seam is. And it's the same thing. You can backstitch and go forward with this. And that just locks in the stitches. And you just keep sewing along. And I usually like to go slow just to really make sure I'm keeping a nice even stitch and a nice even seam allowance so that I don't accidentally go off. Try to use a thread as well that blends if you're worried about not having nice even stitches. But you can see here on the back, so see how there's that zigzag stitch? That's so that when we pull it, see how it pulls and it goes straight? Not totally straight, but straight. That helps with the stretch. And then there's those 2 lines of stitching from the top stitching. And you can see where my seam is here. You can see the seam here, and that's the distance between the seam, and that's what I was saying where I put my needle at a 4. That's to make sure that I get that distance. But again, there's that zigzag stitch on the back, and when you stretch this, it stretches it, so it gives it that room to stretch and you don't get any broken stitches. And I will just do that the entire length of the garment. Now this is a long length. If you look, this is a long garment. I'm not going to make you sit there and watch this, but because it is long and it's going to take me a really long time. So that's how that looks when you're stitching. Really easy, as you just saw. I really enjoy using this stitch because it makes really beautiful top stitching on a garment. Again, your machine may be threaded a little bit differently, so go ahead and thread your machine the way it's supposed to be threaded, but when you're threading it, you'll want to skip. When you do thread this second needle here, you'll want to skip this last thread guide here right before your needle, this last thread guide here right before the needle. So you put the first thread through, but the second thread, it's skipped here. So I hope you enjoyed this little tutorial, and maybe if you're looking to try some garments and you've been scared because you haven't been sure how to construct them and you weren't really sure about top stitching, I hope this does help and will help you not feel so scared anymore, because trust me, it is really easy. You just need that twin needle and you'll have that beautiful stitching. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this and maybe picked up some tips and tricks. I'm looking forward to seeing all your garments. Again, if you have any questions, shoot them in the comments below and I'll reply as soon as I can. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you for watching this. Bye.